So if I walk into a room with a thick manila folder with somebody's name on it, thick folder, it means they know a lot about me. The dummy folder contains 99% just papers, but there'll be one paper or two papers in there that are real. And so what I'll do is I'll ask a question, say, no, I got the answer. I'll reach over for my folder, thumb through it until, oh, here it is.
Do the rules of interrogation change when you're dealing with a psychopath or a narcissist?
They do. With a psychopath, they rarely will confess or admit what they did was wrong. So what you have to do is back them up into a psychological corner where they don't have any wiggle room, and then you have to present them with options. You got three options in your situation. One is bad. Two is a little worse. They're like chameleons. They will drag you down rabbit holes and rabbit paths. And the first couple I interviewed, I mean, they got the best of me, and I'm glad they did. Let me get into their personal space. Once people let me into their personal space, I can start manipulating that. That's why hard interviewing tactics like you see on TV don't work. Subtly, you can pump up pressure. If you move your chair closer to that person, when you close that space, that increases psychological pressure. So what you want to do is you want to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior.
So what I want to say is,
always stick to the story, they say. It's when you start backtracking that you get in trouble. A serial killer once said, "It is a tragic fact that our proper upbringing has become an ally of the police. We do not know how to lie." In this video, I talked to Jack Schafer, a former FBI agent. After numerous interrogations, he now talks about interrogation techniques that work best, effective negotiation skills, how to build rapport with strangers, how to make strangers to like us, and what the person's body language says about their thoughts. Jack is also the author of several books, including The Like Switch and The Truth Detector. Enjoy the video.
So your job was to catch a spy, make friends with that spy, and then make them work against the country that sent them in the first place. And you also did interrogations with people who you somehow may tell you information about them that would send them to prison for a very long time. When would the rapport building actually start? Or in other words, where would you actually come in contact with the suspect in the first place?
Well, the first time I would start building rapport is prior to meeting the suspect, because I would observe the suspect before I met them. And I was a member of the behavioral analysis program. I was a behavioral analyst with the FBI. And our job is a little bit different than what you see on TV with the BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit. And most people are really familiar with them because they're the ones that go to the crime scenes and they try to figure out who did it based on the evidence or artifacts at the crime scene. So they're looking for an unknown person. The behavioral analysts, on the other hand, we have a suspect or a target that we want to interview or we want to influence in some way. So what we do is we do remote profiling. And we would review that person's behaviors. We would look at their personalities. We would look at their needs, their wants, and then we would sit in a room and figure out what their personality is, some of the flaws in their personality, and then we would develop strategies to take advantage of those vulnerabilities.
So what are some of the very effective ways to build rapport quickly with a stranger? Things that work more often than not that makes a stranger like us.
There's basically three things that we do, all humans do when we meet other people. The first thing we do is we eyebrow flash. There's a quick up and down movement of the eyebrows. It's like real quick up, just like that, just real quick up and down. It's 1/64th of a second. And what that says, that's a long distance friend signal. So when people approach one another within 5 or 6 feet, they will eyebrow flash. They are merely communicating to one another that they're friends. So that's the first thing we do when we want to make friends. And I don't want people to take my word for it. I want people to go out and consciously think about when you approach somebody and you'll catch yourself eyebrow flashing.
I do that actually, but I do it with people who I already know, at least acquaintances, not necessarily strangers. So when you eyebrow flash a stranger, that makes them feel more comfortable with you, right?
Yeah, that's exactly why we do that. Because with a stranger, you still feel some sort, even subconscious threat. Who's that person? What do they want? What are they doing? Are they going to take advantage of me? Especially in a big city. You don't eyebrow flash people in a big city because you're telling people, come be my friend, especially with predators. The second thing you want to do is you want to tilt your head slightly to one side or slightly to the other side. And what you're doing when you tilt your head is you're exposing your carotid artery. when you expose your carotid artery, that is a very vulnerable part of your body. So you're saying to that other person, I trust you enough to where I'm going to expose a very vulnerable part of my body. And if anybody's a dog owner, you'll see when you go into your house and your dog greets you, they will sit there and tilt their heads. And what they're saying is, I'm not a threat. So they're sending that signal. And a lot of times the dogs will roll over on their back, expose their stomach, and so they want a little tummy rub. No, what that dog is telling you is, I'm very vulnerable. I'm showing you the most vulnerable part of my body. I trust you. So the first thing we want to do is eyebrow flash and then head tilt. The next thing we want to do is smile. Because what a smile does is physiologically, when you smile, you release endorphins. And endorphins are those things that make you happy. So if I head tilt and smile, then you feel good about yourself and I feel good about me because I'm releasing endorphins. And when I smile at a person, it's very difficult for that person not to smile back because it's just kind of a human nature thing. So that's what we do. So there's a golden rule underlying all these techniques of building rapport, and that is, if you want people to like you, you make them feel good about themselves. So when we smile at somebody, I make you feel good about you. If I make you feel good about you, you're going to like me.
Yeah, and when it comes to strangers, what I notice is that they tend to like me better somehow if we talk about them, because people just love to talk about themselves.
You're making them feel good about themselves. And that we'll get into that in a second. But what I want to point out here is when you want to make friends with people, you start with the nonverbals. And so now that I know what normal people do when they meet people they like, I'm going to emulate that. In other words, I'm going to fake it. So when I meet a person I don't like a child molester or a spy or a murderer, what do I have to force myself to do? Eyebrow flash, head tilt, and smile. And if you want to fake a smile, the best way to fake a smile is raise your cheekbone, your cheeks up a little bit and get your crow's feet working on the side of your eyes, because the brain sees that and recognizes that as being a sincere smile. So you asked, the question was, how do I begin rapport building with a stranger or somebody I don't like? That's exactly how I do it. But the secret is you can now intentionally do that when you meet strangers, even on the internet. You can tilt your head, smile, raise your eyebrows, and that other person says, aha, that person's not a threat.
It's funny, you mentioned child molesters. You were interviewing these people as well. Did you have to prepare a lot more? Because that's someone you don't necessarily like right off the bat. So you have to control at the same time your unconscious hate signals.
Well, that's exactly what I do. Is I look at child molestation, the way I look at it, it's just criminal behavior similar to all criminal behavior. So I don't look at it as necessarily evil. I cut that part out. I have to get a confession from that person because they did an evil deed. But I have to do, but you're right, I do have to carve out some sections with rapists and child molesters. It's a little more difficult, but basically the same principles.
What are some of the things an FBI agent would do to make the person more comfortable? Because on the TV, we always see the suspect sitting in a corner of the room, but is there not a greater psychological comfort if you sit them closer to the door?
Yeah, well, there's two schools of thought. The one school of thought, which is you put the suspect in a corner, that number one, their back is to the wall psychologically. They have no psychological or physical escape except through the interviewer or interrogator. They say, if you cooperate, I will allow an exit from the room. So they're blocking that exit. I prefer to put the suspect nearest to the door as practical, because when people are near a door, they have a psychological and physiological escape. So there's two schools of thought. You may want to put them in the corner, or you may want to put them closer to the door, because there's something called the door confession. In other words, when people hit the doorway, they have a tendency to blurt out things that they wouldn't necessarily say, because they have that physiological and emotional escape.
When do you decide, do I want to keep this person comfortable and relaxed, or do I want to keep them anxious and uncomfortable?
I'm a positive interviewer. I always want to make you feel very comfortable with me. I want you to be able to think that you can share your innermost secrets with me, which I'm going to encourage you to do. And we touched on something earlier. You said people always like me when I talk about them. And there's a technique called empathic statements. Empathic statements are nothing more than taking what a person says, what they're doing, or how they're feeling, using parallel language and mirroring it back to them. So if you see somebody, especially in the interrogation room, they're going to naturally be what? Uncomfortable. So I would say an empathic statement such as, I bet you're feeling a little uncomfortable. And they would say, well, yeah. And then I would add another empathic statement. I bet when you got up this morning, you didn't think you'd be in handcuffs in a FBI office being interrogated, did you? Well, no, I didn't.
Yeah,
and so what you want to do is to construct an empathic statement. You want to say, so you, is because you want to keep the focus on the other person. If you say, I know how you feel, that person says, no, you don't. You're not me. You don't know how I feel. So that lets them know that you, in fact, are putting them at the center of the world in which they think they should be the center of. Because we all think the world revolves around us. You're going to feel good about yourself. And what's the golden rule? If I make you feel good about you, you're going to like me. And I use this technique. I work at the Western Illinois University as a professor, and I see a student on the elevator, and they're smiling. They're happy, right? I say, so what? What does that tell me? So I say, so you must be having a good day, because people that are smiling and happy are having good days. And the student goes, yes, I did have a good day. I just passed a final or a test or a hard test or whatever. And I would tell them, oh, so all your hard work paid off. And they would go, yeah, I studied I studied hard for this and I wanted to get a good grade. And yeah, I pulled it off. And what did we do? We allowed that student to flatter themselves. Flattery works, but there's a way to flatter and a way not to flatter. Because if I say to you, geez, you got nice eyes, nice hair, nice dress, this and that, you automatically, shields are going to go up. So direct flattery isn't always successful. But I could allow you to flatter yourself. Like when I told the student, so your hard work paid off. What is she doing? She's silently patting herself on the back, isn't she? When you are flattered, how do you feel?
Obviously good. That's also a very common advice to people who have social anxiety when they're talking to someone. The advice to these people is focus on that person, talk about them.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of shy people, and I'll give you some, oftentimes in class, when I teach behavioral analysis stuff in class, dating situations always arise. Can I use this to date? And I said, well, absolutely, you can use it to date. Because if you're a shy person and you meet somebody and you're not real talkative, all you want to do is make an empathic statement. You could go for an hour and have a discussion and you not say anything. And especially guys, they'll come back and say, the girl I met at the bar or the party or whatever said I was such a good listener. All he did was use what? Empathic statements to allow her to talk about her, which made her feel very good about her, didn't it?
A lot of times, if we're not conscious of that, we kind of do even reverse when we're trying to get someone to like us, and then we try to impress the person. So we start talking about us. If you do the reverse, you get your goal a lot faster.
Yes, you do. And there's an added bonus, because if I'm with you and I make you feel good about you, you're going to want to come back and see me again to get that same good feeling. You may even think up an excuse to come back and see me just so you could talk to me so I can make you feel good about you.
How important is it to share a snack or a drink with them? Because a lot of times I see in these interrogations on TV, they always ask the suspect if they want a coffee or a tea.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 reasons why we do that. The primary reason is we want to give somebody a drink or food for the first reason, and that's called reciprocity. If I give you something, then you're going to be psychologically predisposed to give me something back. The second reason you want to give somebody food or drink is because 70% of all information is shared over food and drink. The other reason you want to give somebody something to drink, because if I'm talking to you and I'm sip of my coffee or water, and I put that cup directly between you and me, that forms a barrier, which tells me that there is not sufficient rapport developed yet, because there's a barrier. Anytime there's something between us, it's a barrier, and that prevents a rapport from being developed. So you keep developing rapport with that person, then they take the drink and they put the cup on the side of the table. Now you can have rapport established. And you know, a good example of this is when two people are in love and they go to a restaurant, or any people, just business or any social interaction, and there's stuff in the middle of the table. What's the first thing those people do? They remove that stuff and put it off to the side, because they don't want any barriers between the two people.
So if a couple is having their very first date, it's more likely that they'll have their things in between them than if it's their second or fifth date. Without knowing what you're doing, you'll do that.
Yes, subconsciously you will.
Now, what's number fourth reason?
The fourth reason is if you give somebody something warm, there's a tendency in the winter you grab something warm and you feel better about yourself. So these are all subtle techniques. And so what we can do is daisy chain them together. All these techniques daisy chain together. And how do we know that? Think about all humans who have relationships with other people follow these same exact steps. That's why we know it works, because that's how humans communicate with one another. So we're just teaching police officers and FBI agents to what? Communicate in a way in which all people communicate.
If someone is guilty, are they more likely to refuse the drink you offered?
No, they'll take a drink.
Okay,
They'll do anything other than talk about what they did. So my first minutes of any interview, initially 20 minutes, I spent at nothing but what? Developing rapport with that person, getting that person to like me. If I get that person to like me, they will let me get into their personal space. Once people let me into their personal space, I can start manipulating that, influencing their decisions. I'll get you to open the door voluntarily to let me into your personal space. That's why torture doesn't work. That's why hard interviewing tactics like you see on TV don't work. You don't walk in and slap somebody around and they confess. It just doesn't happen in real life. The interview process is, the interview is nothing more than a conversation with a purpose. The purpose is getting to the truth or intelligence.
So you would at no point in time pump up the pressure. You would always make sure that they're relaxed and comfortable.
Well, subtly you can pump up pressure by moving your chair. If you move your chair closer to that person and directly in front of them and move it just a few inches closer, you're closing that space. When you close that space, that increases psychological pressure on somebody. So what you want to do is you want to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior. So if you're not talking to me, I'm going to push back, lean back, cross my arms, cross my legs. I'm distancing myself and sending out negative signals. If you're now talking to me and you're saying things of value, then what am I going to uncross my legs, uncross my arms, sit up in my chair, move my chair away from you to release that pressure, and then I'm going to lean forward and talk to you. So what that does is it rewards good behavior. Yeah, I'll give you a good example of this. There's some kids in my class that are talking, right? So I could do one of two things. I could say, hey, shut up and listen. You think that would work? I don't think so. So what do? Every time they talk, I walk right beside them, within inches of them, maybe even behind the two of them when they're sitting together. And so then when they stop talking, they go, oh, this is bad. I better stop talking. Then I walk away. If they start talking again, I start walking towards them. And as soon as I start walking towards them, they shut up. And I can do that non-verbally.
So, but how do you know when to pull out your ace, be it your best evidence that they're not aware of you keeping?
You want to hold your evidence as long as you can during an interview. And that's called the SUE technique, the strategic use of evidence. You want to hold that to the end. You don't want to tell people what you have initially, and you can use prompts for that. Things you can use to send a message, a silent message to somebody. So if I walk into a room with a thick manila folder with somebody's name on it, the suspect's name on it, big thick folder, it means they know a lot about me, but they don't know how much. And what I'll do is I'll stick real documents in the dummy folder. The dummy folder contains 99% false just papers. but there'll be one paper or two papers in there that are real. And so what I'll do is I'll ask a question, say, no, I got the answer. I'll reach over from my folder, thumb through it until, oh, here it is. And then I'll pull it out, which makes it look like the whole thing is legit when it's actually not.
Oh, I see. So you would have a big map in which there's one or two sheets of paper that's actual information. The rest is pretty much fluffer. And the
Yes.
map is named by...
It's a folder.
Yeah, and the folder has their name. So it would look like you have a whole bunch of information about them. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Now, going back to foods and drinks, I know that judges who ate before the sentencing tend to give less severe sentences, and surgical accidents are more common after lunch. So the circadian rhythm and the blood sugar levels have an impact on a person. Would you pay attention to that at all when interrogating?
Yes, I do, because what you want to do is when you plan your interview in the morning, if you have a long, complicated case that has a lot of math to it, like fraud, you want somebody that's clear thinking and alert, and you go through it. Or it's a long interview, you don't want to have it cut short because somebody has to go home. In the afternoon is when most confessions occur, during the afternoon hours. Your circadian rhythm takes a little dip. That's when most confessions take place.
When it comes to reading the person's body language, what would you look for when you're looking for indicators of discomfort, which could potentially mean that they're lying?
Number one, when they distance themselves. So we distance ourselves from things we don't like, and we come closer or lean in towards things we like.
Okay.
So if I say something to you and you back up, that's distancing. That means you're uncomfortable with it. Even if your head goes back a little bit, you're uncomfortable with it. I like to look at the mouth. The mouth says a lot of things. It talks without saying a word. Something called a lip bite, and that's just a little tugging of the lip. That means you want to say something, but you're reluctant to say it. I see a student tugging their lip, and I say, oh, you have something to say. And they'll go like, well, yeah, but, and I say, oh, you're a little afraid to say it. But it's okay, go ahead and say it. Well, how'd you know I had something to say? Well, you told me by tugging. I don't tell them that, but I know. The other one is lip compression, and that is a stronger indication that you want to say something, but you don't want to say it. You're afraid to say it. I see that most when you talk to criminals right before they confess. They'll give you a hard lip compression. And then I use an empathic statement and say, oh, you want to say something. You want to confess, but you're afraid to. It's okay. We can talk. And the last one I think is the most valuable one, and that is called the lip purse. That means the person we're talking to has formed a negative opinion about what we just said. So if I go to my boss and I make it more practical, I go to my wife and say, geez, I would like a new computer. And then you get to the price. Well, the computer's going to be about $3,000. And all of a sudden you see what? Outward movement of the lips and pursing. You have to get that person to change their mind while they're still thinking about it. Because once you articulate no, it's very difficult for a person to change their mind when we articulate no. So you want to get that. So you say, use an empathic statement. I'll bet you're thinking this might be a little too expensive, but I can make it up because of the advantage I'll have on the trading floor with the options. I'll have an advantage here and make up that money, and then much more after that. So you're convincing that person while their mind is still not made up. Because once we articulate no, it's very difficult to get someone to change their mind. There's a lot of anxiety that goes with decision making. Think about every time you make a decision, you experience a bit of anxiety. So once we make up our mind or make a decision, the anxiety goes away, right? Would you want to intentionally put yourself in a position where you're anxious again? Whatever you articulated, you will stick with to avoid potential anxiety.
Especially if you want to appear a truthful person.
Yes,
so that's why denial is so important in their interrogation. What about some text bridge?
Oh, a text bridge is people tell the truth up to the point they want to withhold information, then they tell the truth again. And there's only like 7 text bridges that people typically use to bridge that missing information. Pretty much every language that we studied, text bridges are there.
Give an example of an English text bridge.
So the bank was robbed at 2 o'clock. And I say, what did you do from like 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock? I went to the store, I drove to my friend's house, and then I went home.
And then?
Yeah, then I went home. That is the most common text bridge.
Are the introverts better elicitors? Because extroverts like to talk a lot.
Yes, actually, we did find that out in our exercises. I teach elicitation, and I gave our students, we teamed them up, an extrovert and an introvert. We sent them to a mall, and we gave them targets. We said, see that person standing there? I want you to walk up to them and initiate a conversation, develop rapport, and find out their date of birth. I was nearby so I could listen to see how well they did. We were grading them. The extrovert walks up and the person gives the date of birth. When I meet the students again and say, how'd it go? And they go, I didn't get the date of birth, the extrovert says. And the introvert says what? Yeah, you did. You got the date of birth. The date of birth is this. And I said, yeah, I heard that your target give you the date of birth. Said, well, I never noticed it. Because you're too busy talking.
Now I remember you talking about that story in one of your interviews. During one of your undercover intelligence operation, you took one student to a jewelry store, like you're casing the place to rob it. How did that play out?
My gosh, I couldn't believe this. I walked into the jewelry store with my student, and they're talking about, oh, it must be tough to rob the jewelry store because of the cameras. Oh, those are dummy cameras. And then that's what the money's just laying there. No, the safe's broken. And I'm going, oh my gosh. I said, well, I probably call the police. Now you can get away with X amount of dollars of jewelry and we don't even report it. I'm going like, my gosh, the police must come by the jewelry store a lot. No, they don't come by at all. I'm like, I left the store and I'm just shaking my head going, what an idiot. He just basically said, come in and steal everything from me. I wanted to go back and tell him, but we were doing a operation. So I said, no, I better just let it go.
I mean, that's quite something.
But it's so easy. Elicitation is so powerful. And I'll give you one specific technique and why it works psychologically. The psychological principle is people have a very, very strong need to correct other people. If you use a presumptive statement is nothing more than you're making an assumption about something. So you can use that by saying, just name anything. So you're married with 2 kids. It's hard to be an options trader, be married with 2 kids, and still have a podcast.
Now, so in practical terms, interrogating a suspect, handling in the market, or asking for a raise all require good negotiation skills. And as a former FBI and body language expert, what's your best advice on how one can become a better negotiator?
Number one, you have to get that person to like you. If you get that person to like you, they are more likely to do what you want them to do. When we like somebody, we want to do things for them. You don't even have to add. If you're friends, you're going to want to do things for your friends, right? So if you get people to like you, they're going to want to accommodate you. They're going to want to help you out. So the first thing I would do in a negotiation is build rapport with that person. And the second thing I would do is find out what their brackets are. And you could use elicitation.
So let's say you're entering a room when you're asking for a raise. An eyebrow flash would help, exposing your vulnerable parts. So the neck, the head tilt.
Yeah, no, you just eyebrow flash, head tilt, and a smile. Hey, boss, how's it going? Sometimes it gets to be too obvious, because when a student comes to my office during office hours and says, oh, Professor Schafer, you're the best professor I've ever had in the whole wide world. And I go like, what do you want? Obviously phony. What's a better way? Professor Schafer, I'd like your advice on something.
That's the reciprocity. They're starting the reciprocal process.
And they're allowing me.
And you feel good about yourself because you helped them with something.
Yeah, and they're allowing me to flatter myself. Of course, the student wants my advice because I'm the professor.
Right.
So you could walk into your boss and say, boss, I'd like your advice on something. I would even, I'd even get a little playful with them and say, boss, I'd like your advice on something. If you were me, how would you go about asking for a raise?
Oh, yeah. Well, humor always helps.
I know. Why does humor work, though? When we laugh, we release endorphins.
Endorphins, that's right.
Endorphins make us feel good about ourselves. So if I can make you laugh, then you're going to feel good about yourself. And if you feel good about you, you're going to like me. The only kind of humor you can really use, especially in today's woketopia, you have to use self-deprecating humor. So nobody is going to complain when you disparage yourself.
I recently had a guest on my interview, and right off the back, both of us knew that we are on a totally different spectrum when it comes to this topic. We knew we're going to disagree 100% on everything. And I could see them being kind of standoffish and kind of afraid a little bit, not knowing where this interview is going to go. And then I immediately started off with a joke. I said, look, today I'm going to look stupid, and I need you to bear with me. And then they laughed, and I felt like the whole thing was kind of more relaxed ever since. And we had a very nice, genuine conversation after that. So that definitely helps.
When you say, put up with me because I'm stupid, I don't know what I'm talking about, you're allowing them to flatter themselves. You didn't realize you did that. But of course I'm better than you. Of course I know more than you. And they feel good about themselves. Oh yeah, that's a good position for people to be in. They like that position.
It's very good. It's a very good feeling for us when we are just a little bit better than the other person. But also for selfish reasons, it gave me permissions to now ask questions that I would be anxious asking otherwise, because now they already know I'm a dummy, and I identified myself as a dummy, right?
Yes, and I use that technique during interview. When I interview people, especially when they know a lot more than I do about the topic, I'll say, look, I'm a rookie. I don't know much about this stuff. I usually work this other target. Now I'm working this target. I know absolutely nothing about it. And then teach me how it works. And so it does allow you to ask what? I've just told the guy, I don't know what I'm doing. You're way smarter than me. And so it makes him feel good about himself. He can show how smart he is. Then he eventually, gets trapped.
Have you ever used the elicitation knowledge in your personal life? What's your most memorable example of that?
We were looking for a house to buy, and we wondered if there was a flooding issue because the basement of the house was completely redone, right? We don't know if they redid it because they wanted to sell the house or they did it because of flood damage. So I went down into the basement. I said, oh boy, this is great for my office, great for the kids to play in. This is a really nice place. They did a really good job remodeling after the flood. And the real estate guy goes, yeah, they did. They did this and this and that. I went, oh, shoot, this place floods. Let's get out of here.
Do the rules of interrogation change when you're dealing with a psychopath or a narcissist?
Yes, they do. With a psychopath, they rarely will confess or admit what they did was wrong. So what you have to do is back them up into a psychological corner where they don't have any wiggle room. And then you have to present them with options. You got 3 options in your situation. 1 is bad. 2 is a little worse. Whatever one they pick, they lose. But they're going to pick the one that to the best of their advantage.
So you're more rational with them. You put them in, everything is in practical terms with a psychopath.
Yes, yes. They're like chameleons. They will drag you down rabbit holes and rabbit paths. And in the first couple I interviewed, I mean, they got the best of me. And I'm glad they did because I learned valuable lessons.
In which ways were they able to manipulate you or take advantage?
They were able to convince me what they did was not really bad. They had a really good excuse. They really had a good rationalization for what they did. And in fact, they lied. And I later found out they lied. So I thought, how did I get taken advantage of? So then I went through and I started doing a lot of research on psychopaths. I actually thank that psychopath for taking advantage of me, because had he not done that, I would have not been forced to learn about psychopaths.
Now, what about narcissists? Because I imagine it's actually a lot easier to manipulate a narcissist.
Yeah, what I like to do, instead of deflating their ego, I like to blow it up like a balloon until it pops.
Yeah, and narcissistic people are actually they're a lot more likely to get dragged into scams. It's a lot easier to scam a narcissist than a normal person, because they believe everything. They're like a child, basically. You're interrogating a child. Is there anything specifically you would use when you know you are dealing with a narcissist?
I would always tell them how smart they are. And then you give them, it's what I call created power. I will give them power. In other words, I'm creating power, giving it to them. If I give that person power, then I can take that power away. So I give them power and then build them up, get their ego really big, and then I snatch the power away, and pop goes the balloon, and they lose.
Yeah, because these people want to be in control, probably, of the situation.
And narcissists are actually very insecure people.
Yeah.
And they use that narcissism to protect the insecurities that they feel, rather than facing the insecurities and saying, look, I made a mistake. I won't happen again. What steps do I take to correct it? They won't admit they made a mistake. That causes an insecurity. Once I know a person's insecurity, they're like putty in your hands.
Yeah, I recently made a video about how to manipulate a narcissist. You keep feeding them supply and then you become their only dealer. And then they're kind of dependent on you for the supply, right? Which is compliments, basically.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah. And then when you take away that supply, now they're like, it's like a mommy taking away the toy.
Well, that's like what I just described was that creative power. You're giving them the in this case your candy or whatever, and then you're just pulling it away. So that's the same principle.
Right.
So
what's your most memorable suspect that you've interrogated?
I think the ones that I like most are the most difficult to interview. Like I interviewed a killer. She put a pipe in his eye, killed him. And it took me 4 or 5 interviews before I was able to get her to confess.
And how long would these interviews be?
Oh, a good interview lasts 3, 4, 5, 6 hours.
Would you ever wear a person down?
Oh yeah, all the time. And I use a technique that I picked up from somewhere, and it's called 1 in a million. I'm going to ask that person, I want you to write down a number between 1 and a million. Don't let me look at it. And then I'll ask them, if I can guess that number, will you tell me the truth? And if they say yes, that means they're lying to me. And they will take a chance and keep talking to me. But if I say, if I guess that number, will you tell me the truth? And they say no, that means they're hiding the truth, they're not telling me the truth, and they continue that path of the interview. So what you have to do is stop the interview and then think of a new way to talk to them.
With all this knowledge that we went over, can we also get the person to like us romantically in that way? Because I know you have a chapter in one of your books that's called The Law of Attraction.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And here's what, if you want to practice, a couple walks into a restaurant and they're holding hands, they're clasping hands versus interlacing their fingers. That's the first thing you want to look at. If they're clasping their hands, that's less intimate than if they were to interlace their fingers. So you say, aha, that's a closer relationship. So then they go to a booth. They sit typically across from one another. Why? Because they want to see one another, catch all the nonverbals. So what's the first thing they do? Anything in the middle of that table, they put to the side of the table, right? And then what do? They lean in, right, towards one another, because we lean towards people we like and we don't lean towards people we don't like. So they lean in. Then they'll maybe grasp hands. And then they'll what? They'll whisper, because they don't want anyone else this is their private conversation. So what you can do is you can look at those behaviors and start to predict what stage that relationship is in. Now, if a couple walks into the restaurant and they sit side by side, that's a different story. And my hypothesis is that couple is newly minted. In other words, this may be the first or second date, because they're so insecure, they want to touch one another. They want to be by. I'm not leaving you. I'm right by your side. But the disadvantage is they can't see one another. They can't look for the nods, the smiles and all that. So after they get to be more secure in that relationship, then they're going to start sitting across face to face. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And are there any indicators that approaching a stranger is going to play out well for you? Like, for example, if their feet are pointed towards you, I heard a lot about that.
Oh yeah, if you're in a situation, a crowded situation, you don't know people, like conventions or parties, you don't know who people are. You look at their feet, and if there's the motto is, if there's a place to put your feet, it's okay to meet.
Oh, so that works.
Yes. So if two people are talking and their toes are facing one another, you don't want to talk to them. But if their toes are facing outward, then there's a place to put your feet. So the motto is, if you can put your feet there, it's okay to meet.
If I enter a gym, and as I'm moving around the gym, there is a guy who doesn't know me, but he seems to be facing towards me all the time, no matter where I go. Is that a sort of an indicator that he might be liking me?
Yeah, it could be. So what
We'll
you can
see.
do, if you like this particular guy, when he makes eye contact with you, just give him an eyebrow flash and then go about your business. And then he'll talk to you. And if you want to send an RSVP, it's this way. Here's what women do. Guys will look in a social situation, like lock eyes with some person of interest. They'll eyebrow flash, tilt their head and smile, and the girl will look at them, and then she'll tug her lip on the bottom. It's a courtship gesture. And she'll look down, and then she'll look up again. And that's an invitation. That's an RSVP that says, come on over. It's okay.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, where can people find you?
Jack Schafer 500 at yahoo.com. You can buy the like switch. It's available on audio and Amazon. And the truth detector, which is elicitation techniques, same way Amazon or Audible. Or you can go to psychologytoday.com, and I have a lot of blogs that are like 400 to 800 words that cover a lot of the material we talked about today.
Awesome. Good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
All righty.
It was great talking to you.
It's the kind of beat that go.